before we dive into the dark, twisted, and occasionally, what the actual hell, side of humanity. Here's a quick note from our imaginary legal team, which consists of a sleep-deprived parent, Google, and a stress ball named Greg. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes. Yes. Both. It's just me, researching these cases like your overly invested ex creeping your socials, thoroughly, obsessively, and with just a hint of judgment. The opinions here are entirely my own and do not represent law enforcement, lawyers, doctors, or your cousin Karen who thinks she's a detective because she binged 4 crime docs and made a Pinterest board. Also, everyone is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, even if the vibes are giving that, yep, they did it. And no, I'm not a licensed psychologist or a doctor, just someone with a brain full of psychology textbooks, way too much coffee, and disturbing level of curiosity. And sometimes, there's a handsome guy who's mostly here for the snacks and the dramatic one-liners. So do your own research. I'm here for insight, empathy, and storytelling. Full disclaimers in the episode description.
She called herself a doctor. She promised healing, renewal, and transformation. Now imagine checking into a health spa to recharge your spirit, only to find yourself slowly starving to death, while your doctor helped herself to your jewelry, your estate, and your last breath. She sold suffering disguised as salvation, building her empire on desperation, fraud, and fatal fasting. People trusted her. People died. And somehow, she kept getting away with it. Until someone managed to escape, starved to death. This is the chilling, true story of Linda Hazzard. Welcome to Crime Unleashed.
Content trigger warning. This episode includes graphic descriptions of violence, mental health struggles, and crimes involving vulnerable individuals. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Please always take care of yourself.
Hey guys, if you're new here, welcome to my little corner of chaos. I'm Rachel, and I host Crime Unleashed with frequent appearances from my husband and other brave souls I can rope in along the way. This is what I do at night instead of sleeping, like normal people. So, you bring the snacks, your blanket, and your favorite drink, and I'll open the case file. Let's jump in. Linda Hazzard, maiden name, Linda Burfield. She was born in 1867 in Carver County, Minnesota, and she was the oldest of 7. Unfortunately, she pretty much decided that traditional medical training was not for her. Who needs a degree when you can just declare yourself an expert? There is not much on her early life as a child that I could find. It really starts at around the age 18, so we'll start there. In 1885, at just 18, Linda married Irwin Perry and had two children, Roland and Flora. And at this time, despite lacking, again, formal medical training or having a real medical license, she did medical things anyway. She was granted a license to practice medicine in the state of Washington. So in 1898, she became an osteopathic practitioner. This is when Linda's so-called fasting treatment was created. It was based on her belief that the root of all disease was impure blood caused by impaired digestion. She wasn't alone in the fasting fad of this time, and according to her book, The Science of Fasting, Linda claimed to have studied under Dr. Edward Hooker Dewey, a well-known advocate of fasting and author of the Gospel of Health. That is really when she was able to get a license to practice medicine. It was through a loophole in the licensing law. At this time, they actually grandfathered in practitioners of alternative medicine. She, of course, titled herself as the fasting specialist, but her philosophy, eating is overrated. According to Linda, all diseases from tuberculosis to headache could be cured by not eating at all. She claimed this method rid people of all toxins in the body that caused imbalances. She wrote 3 books in the course of her career and believed to be the science behind fasting. Here's the thing. In the early 1900s, it was 1800s, I would say the late 1800s and the 1900s. It was a wild time for medicine. There was germ theory, and it was relatively new, and the people were obsessed with, quote, natural cures. Fasting, water therapies, and alternative treatments were gaining popularity because conventional medicine was still kind of sketchy. And to be honest, it really is to this day. But think arsenic tonics and cocaine cough syrup. So, I mean, it's pretty scary even then. The progressive era, which was 1890s to 1920s, was all about self-improvement and purifying the body. People genuinely believed that extreme fasting could cleanse them from these toxins, which made Linda's methods seem less insane than they do today. So the rise of quack doctors was also a thing. Licensing laws were weak, and if you had a white coat and enough confidence, you could convince people of anything. And that is literally what Linda was able to do. In 1898, she decided that, well, family life just wasn't really her thing, and so she ditched her husband and her kids and packed up for Minneapolis. I can never say that, so Minneapolis. She was determined to open up her own fasting practice. So in 1902, Linda opened her first clinic in Minnesota, where she began implementing her fasting treatments. Linda, infamously known as the starvation doctor, was linked to deaths of, they say, about at least 15 individuals under her care, but some reports suggest that the number could be as high as 17. At this time, Linda finalized her divorce from Irwin Perry in 1902, and it's really the same time that she had allegedly caused the death of her first patient through her extreme fasting methods. So, but at this time, again, based on existing historical records and available books about her life, particularly Starvation Heights by Greg Olson, which is considered one of the most detailed and well-researched sources on Linda, there was no widely confirmed name for this first patient who allegedly died under her care in 1902. But many reports simply refer to this person as her first known victim, or the unnamed patient, likely due to poor record keeping at the time and, of course, the legal gray area in which Linda was operating. I have confirmed victims that we will go through a little later. Pertaining to this unnamed victim, though, the coroner determined the cause of death to be starvation and sought to prosecute Linda. However, due to a loophole in Washington state law that allowed some practitioners of alternative medicine to operate without that medical license, she actually avoided accountability. When investigators inquired about the victim's valuable rings, Linda was evasive, raising further suspicion about her practices. But nothing was done at that time. They were keeping an eye on her, but not enough. Then came Samuel Chrisman Hazzard. So he was a West Point grad with a talent for drinking and swindling. He sounded like a real catch, to be quite honest. So Samuel was born on June 18th, 1869 in Pottsville, Pennsylvania. He graduated from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point in 1893 and served as an officer in the U.S. Army's branch. So his military career included a stint as an instructor of modern languages at West Point, but he had a penchant for misappropriating Army funds and torpedoed his military career. Not content with just being a disgraced officer, his service record was marred by misconduct. In 1900, he was dropped from the Army after being absent without leave for several months. Beyond his military troubles, Samuel's personal life was equally troubling. Adding to his resume of red flags, he was involved in bigamy, having married multiple women without properly divorcing his previous spouses. But him and Linda met in Minnesota, where Samuel, still married, and because true love waits for no one, Samuel and Linda tied the knot in 1903. In 1904, this little oversight earned him a 2-year prison sentence for, you guessed it, bigamy. Oops. As soon as Sam was out, though, the two of them made a beeline for Seattle, Washington. This was about 1906 or 7. I couldn't really find a definite year, but this is where she initially started practicing. Linda, now Linda Hazzard, wasted no time setting up shop. her very own fasting clinic in, I think it's Olola. This is where her extreme fasting treatments led to multiple patient deaths. Linda began practicing in Seattle, commuting by ferry from a 40-acre spread in Kitsap County town of I'm sure I'm saying it wrong. Olalla. She named Wilderness Heights. As you will find out, her plan to build a big sanitarium there in that area someday would come, but for now, while they waited for their practice, patients were put in, Seattle hotels or in cabins on Dr. Hazzard's property. And that's when Hazzard's life took a scandalous turn, It took a scandalous turn. And you can tell that it was going to come eventually. Her and Sam were quite the duo, not in a good way though. They had a nasty habit of helping themselves to their patients' assets through fraud, forgery, and outright theft. Many patients mysteriously signed over their estates to Hazzard shortly before dying under her care. And Sam wasn't just along for the ride. He was actively involved in these schemes. He played his part right beside her, making them a team in both the theft and tragedy and grift, making them a team of this horrible incident at this time. Sam was right there with Linda during her most dangerous years. There's no public record showing that the two ever divorced. In fact, they seem to remain both partners in crime and in marriage until Linda's death in 1938. But now the pattern of death was becoming distressingly familiar. Hundreds of devoted followers, including some of Washington's high society elites, people that were well known, was raving about Hazzard's healing powers, calling her a brilliant mind and a gifted force in medicine. Locals, however, had a more fitting name, Starvation Heights, because, people kept dropping dead. Her patients were trapped in her care. Her so-called treatments weren't just extreme, they were brutal. Patients endured prolonged starvation and violent beatings, all under the guise of, quote, cleansing the body and soul. This severe deprivation led to significant weight loss and in most cases in this case, death. And although she was being watched, as I mentioned earlier, she had this license and they really couldn't do anything since a shocking number of people signed up for her treatment. Obviously not knowing who Linda really was, but they did. Now, the autopsy reports listed starvation as the cause of death, unless Linda Hazzard performed the autopsy, in which, of course, nothing was going to say starvation on that cause of death. Nothing was going to appear of, quote, starvation. But I find it crazy that Linda Hazzard performed her own autopsies. That's insane. But yeah. So yeah, she wasn't putting starvation on there as a cause of death for her patients. As more people perished under her care, Linda found herself facing the law for the first time, really. But unfortunately, nothing really happened until 1912. But right now, Hazzard was just beginning. One of her first documented confirmed victims was Lenora Wilcox in 1907 or 1908. Some reports say 1907 and others 1908. Either way, Hazzard had Wilcox fasting for 47 days. Spoiler alert, she did not get better, and yet Linda kept going. This was the same time that Hazzard was promoting her extreme fasting method, which she claimed could cure any disease by purging the body of toxins. In 1908, she published Fasting for the Cure of Disease, outlining her theories on fasting as a treatment method. Little is documented about Wilcox, her patient, beyond the tragic end, but her case was an early warning sign of what was to come. But I found something in 1908 in the New Tribune talking about her death. The fact that she died under Hazzard's treatment did not immediately raise alarms, which is, again, crazy, allowing the so-called doctor to continue her deadly practices for years. Her later victims, many of whom, came to Wilderness Heights willingly, would suffer the same fate, often becoming skeletal before succumbing to their death. Wilcox's death set the stage for Hazzard's reign of medical terror. It wouldn't be until, again, 1912, after the high-profile death of Claire Williamson, that authorities finally took action against her, which we will get into very soon. But just to give you a timeline on the patients that she treated, in 1908, besides Lenora Wilcox, there was Daisy Haglund, who died fasting. Daisy was born in 1870 and, of course, died in 1908. She was a Norwegian immigrant whose parents once owned Alki Point. After a 50-day fast under Hazzard's direction, she died on February 26 at the age of 38. According to the Times, Daisy's friends had pleaded with her to eat. She refused until she, quote, appeared to be a living skeleton. She left behind a 3-year-old son, Ivar. Fun fact about Ivar Haglund, he actually went on to found Ivar's seafood restaurant. He believed in eating. He would go on to make his name and fortune feeding millions of people as the owner of a successful seafood restaurant. However, the Times had to point another story about the autopsy. It apparently showed that she had stomach cancer. So, Ivar's father actually came to Hazzard's defense with full confidence in this fake doctor. So, again, I mean, she was sliding by all of these things. In early 1908, Seattle dentist Dr. D.D. Whedon and his wife fell under the spell of Linda Hazzard's extreme fasting regimen. Convinced by Hazzard's dubious medical advice, they subjected their 8-month-old baby girl to a starvation diet. Concerned neighbors, alarmed by the infant's deteriorating condition, alerted the Humane Society. An officer by the name of Kent intervened, rescuing a child who hadn't been fed for 12 hours and placing her in the Washington Children's Home. Dr. Whedon was arrested on charges of child neglect and abuse, while his wife, bedridden and complicit, faced serious scrutiny. This tragic incident underscored the deadly influences that Hazzard really had over her followers, as she continued to really just peddle her lethal fasting, quote, cures unchecked. There was also Ida Wilcox in the same year. Details about her treatment are scarce, but she succumbed during Hazzard's fasting therapy. In 1909, there was a Blanche B. Tyndall and Viola Heaton, both victims that did not survive the extreme fasting protocols. And then in that same year, Eugene Wakelin. And get this, okay, his death, highly suspicious. It was a little bit different, but this guy was found with a bullet wound on Hazzard's property. And somehow, for reasons beyond logic and sanity, Hazzard had power of attorney over his estate. So if that's not the biggest blaring neon red flag for this woman, I honestly don't know what is. So, here's the thing. Hazzard managed to evade immediate legal repercussions, partly because, again, these patients voluntarily consented to the treatments. Additionally, Washington state law at the time permitted practitioners of alternative medicine to operate with minimal regulations. So she was able to gain control over everything, not just manipulate people. She was gaining control of the patient's assets and becoming the beneficiary of their estates, which eventually provided her with financial means to defend against any legal challenges, which is absolutely horrible. So Maud Whitney and L.E. Rader were patients that lost their lives under Hazzard's fasting regimen in 1910. Lewis Emerson Rader wore many hats. He was a politician, a journalist, and a poet. In the 1890s, he made his mark in Washington state politics as a populist legislator. But by 1910, Rader found himself battling chronic stomach issues, seeking a remedy that traditional medicine hadn't provided. Of course, he was desperate for relief, so he was drawn to Hazzard's radical methods. Rader embarked on this dangerous path, enduring a 29-day fast and tragically on May 11th, 1910, he succumbed to starvation in Seattle, Washington, which all of these are really, really sad. But in that same year, Mr. Earl Edward Erdman, that's Earl Edward Erdman, met with Hazzard. Now, Earl was a civil engineer who meticulously documented his starvation experience in a diary. Despite his detailed records, he unfortunately didn't survive to write his last pages, but either way, I wanted to share some of his entries. I feel his diary provides a detailed account of fasting regimen that he underwent by Miss Linda. So February 1st, it says, initiated treatment with Dr. Hazzard, no breakfast. Consumed mashed soup I don't know what mashed soup is. Mashed soup for both lunch and dinner. February 5th through the 7th, breakfast consisted of 1 orange. Lunch and dinner was mashed soup. The 8th and 9th through the 11th, all of this was all repeated. 1 orange for breakfast, mashed soup, lunch and dinner. There's another one, a strained soup, 1 orange for breakfast. I mean, actually on February 12th, consumed 1 orange for each meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So now February 13th, it starts to move a little faster. Breakfast included 2 oranges, skipped lunch and dinner. He repeated these previous days' regimen, but noted improved sleep, but experienced significant dizziness and observed yellow streaks and redness in his eyes. On February 17th, he ate 3 oranges throughout the day, and then on the 19th, he visited Dr. Dawson at his residence, reported a restful sleep on Saturday night, and then reported better sleep Wednesday night, which was the 24th, experienced a headache, though, in the morning, and ate 2 small oranges. This pattern of minimal substance continued, with Erdman noting a gradual decrease in food intake much faster. He began experiencing dizziness, backaches, and other symptoms that were indicative of severe malnutrition. On March 28th, less than a month, then from the diary notes that we were taking, Erdman was admitted to Seattle General Hospital, where he died that afternoon, just before a planned blood transfusion by a coworker. So I'm glad that he kept a diary, but even still, if he thought that he was getting better, and I feel like that has a lot to do with the way Linda and a lot of people can convince people that you're getting better, that it's all in your head. You're getting better. All you have to do is eat nothing and you're gonna get better. So he believed it, even though he was writing all these things down, which is it honestly can happen today. But so in 1911, enter the attorney Frank Southard. Frank Stewart Southard was a prominent Seattle attorney and partner in the law firm Morris, Southard, and Shipley. In 1911, he became one of the victims of Linda Hazzard's notorious fasting treatments. While specific details about his treatment under Hazzard are scarce, his death is listed among those attributed to the extreme fasting regimen. Notably, his law partner actually defended Hazzard during the trial that put her in prison. So that's freaking crazy. But that truly highlights the complex web of personal and professional relationships surrounding her practice, and the manipulative she was just very convincing. And at that time, again, natural medicine was the thing. In that same year, a man named C.A. Harrison also died under Hazzard's care. Quote, care. But here's the crazy part. So he wasn't just a random patient. He was actually the guy that he was a publisher of Alaska and Yukon magazine, and he published Hazzard's own book, Fasting of the Cure of Disease. So the dude literally published her nonsense, but ended up dead because of it. So, that tracks. Okay, so then there was John Ivan Flux, a British national. He was among the victims of Linda Hazzard extreme fasting treatment in 1911. He actually traveled to the United States with intention of purchasing a ranch. However, after undergoing Hazzard's regimen, he died with only $70 to his name, suggesting that his assets may have been appropriated during his treatment. He was just another individual who did not survive the fasting treatment Hazzard offered. Of course, it's just really, really sad. But then the Williamson sisters. So I'll go back to the sisters, Claire and Doretha Williamson, but first a couple more in 1912 because Hazzard was still going. So in 1912, Mary Bailey, Ida Anderson, and Robert Graham were among the individuals who tragically lost their lives under Linda Hazzard's care in 1912. While specific details about their individual cases are limited, their deaths, of course, are documented from extreme fasting treatments. Additionally, Fred Ebsen's death is notable in the context of fasting treatments, and although he was not directly under Hazzard's supervision, he died while undergoing a similar fasting regimen administered by another prominent of extreme fasting that actually partnered with Hazzard. So, yeah, I would say it's under Hazzard. So, absolutely crazy. So, back to the Williamson sisters. Now, if it weren't for these sisters, honestly, who knows how long Linda would have continued her killing spree. And again, we'll get into that a little bit more. But Claire and Doretha, also known as Dora Williamson, were two wealthy British sisters that fell for Linda's fasting will cure you nonsense. They checked into Starvation Heights in 1911. They were really eager for a little wellness retreat. Obviously not what they got, but their treatment was ultimately led to a high profile trial. So after reading Hazzard's book, I cannot talk today, sorry guys. After reading Hazzard's book, they decided to undergo her fasting treatment in 1911, initially staying in Linda's Seattle clinic. They were later moved to Hazzard's sanitarium in Olalla, Washington. So, like all the others, the sisters were subjected to extreme fasting, consuming minimal sustenance, which led to severe emaciation. Sadly, when their family found them, Claire did not make it, and Dora was basically a skeleton with a pulse weighing less than 60 pounds. Conveniently, though, Linda actually already made herself the legal guardian of their estate. We learn in the trial that not only did Hazzard administer the fatal treatments, but also took control of the Williamson sisters' assets, including all jewelry and financial documents. The sisters were found by a family governess that actually lived in Australia, Margaret Conway. She actually became suspicious after receiving a concerning telegram from one of the sisters. So she went up there to find them, and what she walked into was ultimately a nightmare. Unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, it was discovered that Claire had already died and Dora was gravely ill when she walked in. So now Conway wasn't about to let this slide. Her relentless persistence forced an investigation into Hazzard's twisted treatments. Dora survived, and boy did she have stories to tell. Stories that would expose the monster behind the fasting cult. Dora actually took a stand and let loose. She spilled the truth about how she and Claire had been starved, manipulated, and really just bled dry. Dora talked about how Hazzard had promised her health but just delivered nothing but misery. How she forged documents to hide the real cause of death, and how she used the fasting treatments as a cover for her ruthless money grab. And it wasn't just physical suffering. Dora's testimony revealed how Hazzard isolated them from their families, making them dependent on her, which I'm sure you guys know this is something that happens all the time. In domestic disputes and domestic violence cases, most times, the violent spouse will end up isolating that other person, their partner, from their families, so that they feel that they can't do anything. They need that violent partner. They are dependent on them, and this is why they do it, because they can get away with anything. They can convince them with anything. They can just they can do whatever they want. Now, Dora had enough courage to actually name names. So she named all the ones that turned a blind eye and just didn't do anything. So, of course, all the people like the co-conspirators, people that were in there helping Hazzard she wasn't doing it by herself, but all those people that manipulated the legal system to make her crimes disappear. There's a lot of other witnesses testified about the brutal treatments and the emaciated conditions of the patients, but Dora really stuck it to them when she got on the stand. So the defense attempted, or better yet, had the audacity to claim that the patients knew exactly what they were signing up for. I mean, who in their right mind would consent to any of that, really? The prosecution highlighted Hazzard's greedy motives and the growing body count on her watch. The trial was being described by witnesses hearing about the patients wasting away, Linda forging wills, and people literally begging for food. But Linda's response was, that, quote, "That's just the detox process." I mean, she had been getting away with this, since 1908, so why stop now? Maybe before then. She twisted the narrative, played the victim, and truly hoped everyone would buy into her BS. She claimed she wasn't a fraud or a killer. No, she was just a brilliant woman being persecuted for being ahead of her time. Those are her words. According to her, the real villains were jealous, male doctors, and the close-minded medical establishment, bitter that her natural healing methods were making headlines. The trial garnered significant media attention, with reports emphasizing the dangers of unregulated medical practices. There was an article by I'm going to get this wrong, Waganui Chronicle, January 26, 1912. It was titled "The Linda Hazzard's Prosecution," and it detailed the legal proceedings against Hazzard, shedding light on the public's awareness, and the media's portrayal of her practices at that time. But yeah, then I found this even more interesting. Her lawyer, probably realizing that she was, a dramatic outburst away from burning her own case, kept her off the stand entirely, but that didn't stop her from throwing signals at witnesses like she was coaching from the sidelines. So the judge saw, and he was not impressed. And then came, in the trial, all of the receipts. A forged diary entry claiming Claire Williamson wanted Linda to have her diamonds. Financial records of missing jewels, altered legal documents, it all piled up. And to the heartbreaking medical testimonies, a lineup of evidence that screamed con artist. And the jury had plenty to chew on. They finally made a decision. The crazy thing is, she still had her die-hard defenders. So one of them being John Ivor Hagelin, the man that lost his wife Daisy under Hazzard's care. Literally, one of her first victims in Washington was actually one of them. He lost his wife, and yet this man still believed in her so much that he brought their son to her clinic 3 times a week. Insane. Some people, there's just no excuse, truly. In the end, the jury came back with a manslaughter conviction. Now, murder and manslaughter are forms of homicide, which means, causing the death of another person, but they differ in terms of intent, premeditation, circumstance. So, just real quick, murder, a lawful killing of another human being with malice, meaning the killer either he intended to kill, intended to cause serious harm, or acted with extreme recklessness and disregard for human life. There's different degrees of murder, though. So, there's first degree, second degree. First degree being premeditated and intentional. Second degree is intentional but not premeditated. In Hazzard's case, though, if the jury had found that she intentionally caused the death of Claire Williamson or any of the other patients, knowing her actions would actually kill them, they could have charged her with murder. And I'm not saying that she didn't intentionally do it, but the jury is saying that they gave her manslaughter because it's the killing of a person without the intent to kill or cause grievous harm. There's voluntary manslaughter, which happens in the heat of the moment, moment or when they're provoked. It's an emotional response. And then there's involuntary manslaughter, which is a negligent act that leads to someone's death without intent. Also, maybe reckless behavior or failure to act responsibly, but that person ends up dead. So Linda Hazzard was convicted of manslaughter, likely involuntary manslaughter, because the jury believed that she did not, one, she didn't intentionally murder Claire, and two, she was criminally negligent in her actions, directly causing Claire's death. So whether I think that is important in this case. Hazzard claimed she was offering medical treatment even though she wasn't truly licensed. She framed fasting as therapeutic. The jury may have seen it as a reckless medical malpractice rather than outright intentional murder. So, she still went to prison, but manslaughter conviction meant that it was going to be a less severe sentence. And it acknowledged negligence over premeditated evil despite the public outrage. So, and although they exposed it all, Linda Hazzard, because of the manslaughter conviction, she would only be sentenced between 2 to 20 years of hard labor. So at first, many people thought this was justice, well served, but that didn't last long because she only served 2 years. 2. Like, they handed her a gold-plated ticket to freedom and let her skip out early. She actually got a full pardon in 1960 because of course she did. So despite being convicted, do you think that she continued? Do you think that she stopped starving people? No, she didn't. She continued. She had fun. After her pardon, she and her husband, Sam, yes, he's still there, took a little detour to New Zealand. And she kept on fasting people to death because why not? She began practicing as a dietitian and osteopath. It is unclear how many patients she treated there, but she continued promoting her extreme fasting treatments. So Hazzard practiced there until about 1920, but in 1917 in the newspaper in New Zealand, it was reported that Hazzard held a practicing certificate from Washington State Medical Board. However, in 1918, she was actually charged in Auckland under the Medical Practitioners Act for practicing medicine without proper registration. She was found guilty and she was fined. Despite this, she continued her practices, though she never actually achieved the same level of influence as she did in Washington. Honestly, she was able to avoid scrutiny that followed her in the United States. But don't worry, because she returned to Olalla, Washington in 1920. And that is where she established her infamous sanitarium known as Wilderness Heights, right there in Washington, under a new name, though, the School of Health. Because, honestly, Starvation Heights wasn't great for marketing, to be quite honest. But due to that revocation of her medical license, she could no longer legally operate a medical facility. So she rebranded it as a school so that she could continue doing what she was doing. Crazy. But she did it. She got around whatever she needed to get around to continue whatever she wanted to do. So maybe, I don't know. For years, she kept at it, skirting the law by calling herself a dietitian instead of a doctor, and unbelievably, people still signed up. Patients, many of whom were wealthy or just, desperate, checked into her facility seeking healing. But the same dangerous cycle resumed. Reports suggest that individuals under her care experience extreme weight loss, prolonged starvation, and in some cases, there was death. However, due to her past conviction, she was more cautious this time, avoiding legal trouble by ensuring that patients consented to the treatment. But actually consented to the possibility of them dying, I'm assuming, is how she got around it. Unfortunately, specific records of patients treated between 1920 and 1935 are scarce. The lack of detailed documentation makes it challenging to identify individual cases or outcomes during this period. And in 1935, it all finally came to an end. So her sanitarium mysteriously burned to the ground. And it could have been karma. It could have been the ghost of Claire Williamson. I don't know. But it did. It burned to the ground. Samuel Hazzard eventually passed away November 18th. But it was actually after her. So ironically, in 1938, the very method that she swore by, starvation, led to her death. She self-imposed starvation. She tested her own method on herself, and it worked very well. She passed away in 1938, and then Samuel Hazzard passed away November 18th in 1946. But her death served as a darkly poetic ending to a career built on dangerous and deceptive medical practices, which today she's remembered as one of the history's most disturbing figures in alternative medicine. She was a woman whose deadly convictions cost the lives of numerous patients while she profited from their suffering. So I do have some questions for you guys because I want to know, and I'm curious. One of these questions is, when someone really believes that they're doing the right thing, even as it's killing them, how do you save them from that? How do you pull someone back when the person's hurting them, the person hurting them is the only one they believe can heal them? I mean, they thought that they were signing up to a treatment, not a slow, torturous death, but by the time they started to realize something was seriously wrong, it was already too late for them. I would say more than likely, because she had, in all of the studies from what I've seen, she had forged signatures, so she owned their estate, she was their legal guardian, and they were already just down. I mean, they were weak, down. So was it already too late for them? Was it too late for them to escape? And then also, how do you help someone who doesn't want saving, especially when everything and everyone around them thinks the new treatment will work? Like, you can't get their mind off of that. I can actually think of a couple of events that happened even to this day, recently, not too long ago, where people, choosing to take or do something that they were told would help them, only to find out later that it was far from helping them. But drop your thoughts in the comments because I want to know, and we will be back next week in another dark chapter. Bye.